Awesome. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth session in our planning for a gnarly future online learning series, reimagining planning to empower your community. This session is called Redefine Solutions Beyond Boundaries, Craft Regional Solutions for Regional Problems. My name is Elizabeth Soja. I'm the coordinator of the Gateway and Natural Amenity Region, or the NAR initiative, and I'll be hosting today's session. For those of you not familiar with the NAR initiative, we are a cross-university partnership between Extension at Utah State University, the Institute of Outdoor Recreation and Tourism at Utah State University, and the Wallace Stegner Center's Environmental Dispute Resolution Program at the University of Utah. Our mission is to help Western Gateway communities and the regions and public lands around them thrive and preserve the things that make them special. We cannot do that without sponsors. So we are incredibly grateful for our sponsors for this series, including APA Utah, who has provided continuing education credits for this session. So any of you who are interested in those AICP CE credits, Jordan is going to drop that link into the chat for you. We are always looking for more sponsors and partners, so please shoot us a note if you want to contribute or support our work. Jordan also put a link to our website in the chat where you can learn more about us if you're not as familiar with us. And you can also sign up for our email list on our website. You can also support our work by donating to our PayPal, which has been put into the link as well, and every little bit helps. Today, we are so excited to be joined by three incredible speakers. Devin Middlebrook, who's the Sustainability Program Manager for the Tahoe Regional Planning Authority. He's also the former mayor of South Lake Tahoe, California. Emily Friedman, who's the coordinator of the Zion Regional Collaborative in Washington County, Utah. And Mikey Goralnik, who is the Senior Community Design and Development Planner for Mariposa County, California, right outside Yosemite National Park. A few things to expect and some housekeeping. This session is being recorded, so that recording will be made available after the session is concluded, probably in the next couple days. This will be an interactive session, so we encourage you to participate. We're going to be putting chat prompts in the chat. We also have the Q&A function, so if you have any questions for our panelists, please use the Q&A function for those questions. You can use the chat function to answer our prompts and make any comments or observations and engage with each other if you'd like. Please make sure your chat is set to go to everyone. So those of you who have been on our webinars before know that this is how they roll. We love to engage our audience. So very first, to start out this session, we'd love if you could share your organization, the community you live in and or work with, and one aspiration you have for today's webinar. Whoop. And we'll give everyone a few seconds to put that into the chat when you get a chance. Awesome. So we have some answers coming in. We have Springdale. I hope to learn what other communities have learned the hard way. Very nice, Barbara. That's one thing we hope to share. We have Eastern Oregon, learning new strategies for working outside my organization silo. Perfect. Patagonia, Arizona, inspirations and strategies for our future community conversations. Another Patagonia, Planning and Development Committee. Awesome. Karen from the Tahoe region, just tuning in. Awesome. That works. We are grateful to have you tune in. Vermont Forest Parks and Recreations, how others have addressed challenges. Bear River and Logan, Utah, engage private and public sectors to work together. Awesome. Well, thank you guys. We would love to have you keep sharing that in the chat just whenever you get a chance so you all can get to know each other. Make sure that your chat is set to go to everyone. There's some folks who have introduced us to the panelists. and us. So we're so excited to have you all on today, and we hope we can meet some of your aspirations. Before we totally dive in, I want to give a quick background on our series. So this is obviously part 4 of a 5-part series called Reimagining Planning in Your Community. And you'll notice something similar between all of these. They all have the word re in them. And so refocus, reframe, re-engage, redefine, and reimagine. And that's because over the last 3 years, what we've been hearing from communities is that the old way of doing things just isn't enough anymore. The traditional way of that planning has happened cannot keep up with the rapid change that is happening in Gateway and our communities, especially in the post-COVID world. So this webinar series is a result of those conversations. So our vision for planning for a gnarly future is, 1, we are doing these learning sessions. We're doing webinars where we give you all information and content that we hope is really valuable, and some examples from real world communities on the ground. And we also are doing peer-to-peer sessions where you all can engage with each other, chat with each other about your challenges and also what you're hearing, which, by the way, we have one right after this. And so Jordan's going to put a registration for that in the chat for anyone who wants to join us afterward for that peer-to-peer session. We'd love to have you. Yeah, and just like talk about what we're hearing and what you all are seeing. After we conclude this series, we're going to take all the feedback and ideas and needs that we've heard from communities and from the series, and we want to further refine them into the content that we've heard into a fully fledged online academy, the NARcademy maybe. And these will be courses that have certificates on them about how to dive deep into these challenges and into these topics. So, they'll have the nuts and bolts, we'll tie in the research and the literature, and really we want to empower all of you to do this work well out in the real world. Our goal is to create a resource for NAR communities to begin to reimagine planning not just as an effort to establish land use regulation or ordinances, but also as a way to empower your community to really engage in the act of creating a community that's vibrant and that can thrive. So along that theme, this session is called Redefine. And we called it Redefine because sometimes it feels like we are restricted to the little bubbles that we live in. Sometimes our individual worlds make us feel like what we are experiencing and the problems we have, we can only tackle those problems within those confines of within our world and within what we already have available to us. And that's just not the case. There's so much more out there if we know how to look for it. And so to start off with, we have a short poll that Jordan is going to launch here. And it's going to ask you 3 questions. Have you been a part of a regional partnership or collaboration in the past? Do you currently have relationships with your neighboring communities? And do you currently have relationships with your neighboring land agencies? You'll notice that our answers aren't necessarily the most scientific, but we think they're fun. And we also think that they still get at the heart of like how we feel about engaging in these processes and starting them. Awesome. Great, we'll give that a couple more seconds. And we're going to end that poll in just a couple seconds here. And I'm going to share the results with you all. So it looks like over half of you are currently in a regional collaboration. Awesome. Well, I would love to learn from all of you. And we would love to chat with you at the end of our session here. Do you currently have a relationship with your neighboring community? Yes, we're friends, kinda. Not yet, but I'd like to. Okay, so there's some room for improvement for growing that relationship. But it's exciting that a third of you are friends with your local communities. Not so much the case with the neighboring land agencies. There's 20% of our audience who don't even know who their neighboring land managers are. and a lot of kindas. So over half of our audience isn't quite sure. So that's great. It's great to know where you all are coming from, and I'm sure our panelists can relate to where you're coming from. So thank you all for doing that. As I previously mentioned, we've been talking to communities all over the West, not only about their challenges, but about some of the innovative solutions they've come up with to try and face these challenges head on. We're actually in the midst of researching and doing interviews with regional collaboratives from NAR communities across the West. And we've noticed some common threads in the stories that we're hearing there, and we'd love to share them with you all to kick off this session. So, big disclaimer again, by no means is this the 7-step magic to start a regional collaboration or start these conversations, but this is what we're hearing. And this is what we hope to bring to all of you, hear your thoughts, and then refine more into a deeper dive later. So these are our 7 tips for starting this process. Number 1, map your problem shed. And so problem shed is a word we obviously made up. But the reason why we said problem shed is, what is the problem? So, if you get in a car accident, that's a very contained problem that's happening right there in that moment. But the problems facing our communities are often bigger than that. The problems we're facing are wildfire risk, water quality, uh, housing affordability. These are problems that are happening on a much bigger scale than just one little community can handle. And so, what is the problem shed of the problem you're trying to tackle? Define it as explicitly as possible. And then, most importantly, what is the issue of mutual concern that's going to bring everyone together? The issue of mutual concern is lingo that's often used in the negotiation and dispute resolution world. Danya mentioned it in our second session around reframing, because the issue of mutual concern is what's going to get everyone to come back to the table, even after they really disagree, they feel really strongly that somebody's wrong. What's the thing that's going to keep them coming back? What's the thing that the rancher and the mountain biker and the forest supervisor and the superintendent all care about, and that they're all going to be willing to overcome any challenges to keep engaging in? Number 2, map your solution shed. So who needs to be in the room? Who do you need to talk to? Who can be or who must be part of the solution? Emily's going to give a great example from the Zion Regional Collaborative. Zion National Park, right next to Springdale, Utah. The decisions Zion makes has a big impact on Springdale. And so, if Zion closes its gate for whatever reason, that's going to impact the local businesses. Where do all of those people go? And so, if Springdale was trying to make solutions to challenges and the park wasn't in the room, that would obviously limit what they were able to do to address that challenge. And so we're excited to hear from the Zion Regional Collaborative about how they were able to build some of those bridges. Does this need to start with grassroots engagement or grass tops engagement? So grassroots engagement is from the community. It's community led, community driven. Grass tops is with the leaders. So, community leaders, federal agency leaders, do they need to talk together and figure out what they're trying to do and then take that to the community? Where does this start? Number 3, start the conversation. When do you start? So is there a comp plan update coming up that you can kind of piggyback on? Is it related to a project? Is it related to a crisis? So COVID was a catalyst for a lot of conversation between communities and their local partners and neighbors that had never happened before. One thing we heard from a lot of communities is that when COVID happened, those who had existing relationships with their local federal land agency partners fared a lot better, because their local Forest Service representative could say, hey, by the way, we're closing all of the bathrooms in the entire forest. So you're probably going to have a lot of campers come into town to go to the bathroom. And that mayor and city council has a heads up on that and can try to wrestle with that problem before it's already happening. The next is, who's going to start it? Find a convener. Who is it? Is it going to be, led by the city council? Is it going to be led by the local planner? Is it going to be led by an outside consultant? Or do you have to bring in a facilitator because things got really messy 20 years ago and there's a lot of bad blood and we need somebody who can help us heal that? Number 3, where will you meet? This is something that sometimes doesn't feel like a big deal, but can have a lot of sway, actually. You know, if there is so for example, in rural Utah where EDR did a project, there was bad blood between the local agencies and the local landowners. They did not get along or like each other. So if that facilitator had proposed the visitor center as the place to convene, the local landowners would probably not engage in that process. They'd be much more hesitant to. And so finding a neutral location that doesn't have any baggage can help these things move along. And fourth, how will you engage the community? Even if it starts at that grass tops, it's got to get out there to the community so they know what you're doing. Number four, and this is the hardest one, make room. Make room for differences in thought, make room for history or baggage, because even if you don't engage with it, it's there. Jordan did a great job talking about this in our third session around community engagement. If this mayor and this mayor got in a huge fight 30 years ago and those two communities hated each other ever since, if they need to come together, whether or not you wanted to, that's going to come into the room with them. And so you need to make room for that to be talked about and worked through because it's there whether you want it to be or not. Humans, we are all different. We all have differences of thought. So it's really important to stay curious. Don't go into any of these thinking that you know what the answer will be. You might be surprised what others bring to the table. Number five, think about longevity. If this is around a project like a trail or a wildfire mitigation plan, maybe it can be open and closed. If it needs to keep going, if this needs to be sustainably ongoing conversation, where's it going to live? How does it keep going? What shape is it going to take? Who's going to pay for it or lead it? Number six, communicate progress, especially if you engage the community, because people want to know that their feedback didn't just go into a black box. They want to know what it led to. Giving regular updates on how things are going, even if they're not going well, can be so important to keep people engaged and knowing that this is still happening. And celebrating the wins. We heard this from Chaffee County, Colorado, actually. Even the small ones, even if you keep encountering barriers, those little wins were the result of really important relationships and work that you've done. And so taking time to celebrate them and not only focusing on the problems that are still facing the community can really help keep the momentum going and keep the spirit alive. And finally, step 7, don't get discouraged. This is a long process. It's much longer than sometimes we would like to think. It's relationship building. So I interviewed people from Gunnison Valley, Colorado over the summer about their One Valley Prosperity Project. And in hindsight, that project everybody's really happy with the outcomes that came out of that. It led to their Sustainable Tourism and Outdoor Recreation Committee, where ranchers and mountain bikers work together to talk about trails and different projects. It also led to some affordable housing solutions. And it took so much longer than any of them thought. They thought it would maybe be open and shut within a year, and it took over a year. And in the midst of it, people can start to get frustrated, like, where's this going? What if it doesn't lead to anything? But just knowing that it's a long process that you're going to be engaging in, it's important to know upfront. And last, you will hit barriers. People, again, we are complicated. We all have different backgrounds and beliefs, and they're not always going to agree on what the right solution is. And people might be skeptical, especially if past planning processes didn't show much. You'll have to figure out when you come up on that barrier, do you go over it? Do you go around it? Do you try and come at it from a different angle? It's an inevitable part of this process. And so just going in knowing that and knowing that, again, that issue of mutual concern is important enough to keep engaging, even if you hit those barriers, is so important. So with that, that's enough out of me. I know you're all here to listen to our panelists, so we're really excited, and I would love to invite them all to turn on their cameras now and introduce themselves. So we've invited Devin, Emily, and Mikey to talk about their experiences with building and coordinating regional collaboratives in some of the most iconic NAR communities in the West. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves now. Emily, would you like to go first?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. My name is Emily Friedman. I'm the coordinator of the Zion Regional Collaborative, which is an informal planning organization centered around Southwest Utah and specifically Zion National Park. I've been in that role since 2019 and get to stick around for another year. I also, in November, moved to Vermont, where I am currently facilitating a conservation and recreation planning effort in the Mad River Valley. So west versus east, but definitely similar work. And it's been interesting to see where that overlap is.
Awesome. Mikey, would you like to go next?
Yes, of course. I'm a landscape architect and a community planner for the county of Mariposa. Population approximately 17,000 people, based out of our county seat, also called Mariposa. Population about 1,700 people. And the town of Mariposa is one of the like central gateway communities to Yosemite National Park. So that's of note significantly. Also, though, worth mentioning is that including Yosemite, the total landmass in our county that is managed by federal agencies is about 50%. So nearly half of Mariposa County is managed by Park Service, then Forest Service, and BLM. So definitely a gnarly place, and probably similar to many of the places where you all live and work. So looking forward to telling you a little bit about our situation and hopefully learning about yours.
Awesome. And Devin, would you like to go next?
Yeah, Devin Middlebrook. I'm the Sustainability Program Manager with the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, and we are a bi-state compact agency that is in charge of development and transportation standards around Lake Tahoe with both the California and Nevada side to achieve our environmental goals. And as it says, I'm former mayor of the city of South Lake Tahoe. And Mikey, I think I have you beat. We're 87% public land in our region.
Touche.
Yeah, it's amazing how in our communities have so much federal land in them. It makes them magical and can make things complicated. And this actually segues really great into our questions. So we'll just dive right in. Our first question is, we want to set the stage with the fact that partnerships can happen on a variety of scales and in a number of different contexts. So to start, it would be great if each of our panelists could share their perspectives on the role that each of you play within your organizations and within the regional partnerships you've been a part of. And Devin, since yours is by far the largest, would you like to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, we in our regional collaborative for the last 20 years have been helping manage what we call our environmental improvement program. I was started in 1998 with a visit by then President Bill Clinton. And this is our partnership of over 50 different organizations who are working to restore and protect the environment of Lake Tahoe. And our role in that collaboration is really the backbone organization. We co-chair that organization with the U.S. Forest Service and serve as the coordinating body. So we do all of the coordination there. And you really, I think, anytime you're looking at a collective impact model and a collaboration on any scale, you really do need that backbone organization who can hold everything together, who has the meeting space, who has the funding to have staff, put out the agendas, run the meetings, do all the follow-up. So that's the role we play in our partnership.
Awesome. I'll just go backwards from my last order I had y'all go in. So Mikey, do you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, so I work for the county. I work in the planning department of the county, so just work for one agency within the larger county government. So as far as my specific role, kind of a unique one. I work in the planning department, but I don't do like current planning type issues. So I'm not at all involved in the things that most planning departments do. So your deck or your setback or implementing the sign ordinance, things like that. My colleagues do all that. I don't know anything almost about many of those topics. My emphasis is more on community design, and from that perspective, I'm able to take like a larger role in representing or advocating for the county in relationships or partnerships, but any kind of relationship with any of our regional neighbors. And then I think that's an important kind of thing to think about, is that they're not all partnerships. In many cases, depending on, at least from my perspective, depending on the project or the sort of the situation, in some cases the county's kind of the lead. In other cases, the park or the forest or BLM is the lead, and the county is just really sort of there to be informed about what's taking place. So yeah, that sort of partnership type of relationship is not necessarily what all of our dealings doesn't really define all of our dealings, but increasingly is becoming and certainly where appropriate for the best, more common and more sort of collaborative arrangement. So the project that if we have a chance that I'll probably talk about the most is definitely a partnership, and that's great. But in some cases that's not the best arrangement. In other cases, it's better for the county to take a back seat. So yeah, that's kind of how we do it, and that's how I contribute.
Yeah, and Mikey, yeah, we're hoping to talk a little bit more later about the housing and mobility strategy that you guys worked on with the park. And so excited to hear more about that later.
Cool.
Emily, would you like to go next?
For sure. So as I mentioned, I'm the coordinator of the Zion Regional Collaborative, which has been around since 2015, was really kind of kicked off with support from the NAR Initiative and University of Utah. In our region, the ZRC has a very unique position in that it is structured not around a project or necessarily a geographic region, but really around the idea of a process, and that process being collaboration. So rather than being, informal conversations or incorporating collaboration into existing processes and different entities, which happens as well, the ZRC is a forum specifically for collaboration. It's a very grassroots entity in many ways. Everybody who participates in the ZRC does so on a voluntary basis, representing their organizations. And we are not structured with legal status. The ZRC is very informal. I'm an independent contractor in my role. So a lot of it is just the commitment and the relationships between our members that keeps the ZRC going. So it's a very unique, special, and I think incredibly worthwhile and valuable organization. Very different from a lot of the other collaborative efforts going on.
Yeah, and ZRC, despite their lack of legal power, has been able to obtain into some pretty big things. And so excited to hear about some of, maybe the UDA funding and things along that vein later on in the conversation. And that actually segues really well into the next question. So Emily, I'm going to ask you, and then Devin and Mikey, if you have thoughts, feel free to chime in after. Along that same vein, what important considerations should be made before you start a partnership or start on that journey?
Well, when I stepped into the ZRC in 2019, I was coming from the East Coast. The ZRC had already been around a few years, and I found the most important thing in getting involved and in growing the ZRC and its relationships was just humility and a recognition that I didn't necessarily know what the situation was. So I would say the most important consideration is trying to enter all of these conversations and these spaces with an interest in learning. And as was mentioned, being curious. And it's only through that process of learning and discussions and conversations that you can gauge what would be an appropriate level of collaboration. So whether that is, again, just trying to build those relationships informally so you know who you can call when you have a particular issue, whether it's incorporating it into a general plan or, a NEPA process, something like that, who your partners are and your connections, or whether it is creating a completely separate collaborative structure the way the ZRC has. It can be difficult to gauge what your community needs until you have those really open and honest conversations. And I would definitely encourage folks to go in, kind of empty mind, blank slate, and be willing to listen to what your community is telling you that they need, as opposed to telling them what they need.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, Emily, of you were coming in from the East Coast and then as an outsider, but within each of our regions and communities, there's outsiders that are already on the inside that may not be engaged with certain aspects of the partnership or the problem you're trying to solve. So I think whoever's looking to start a partnership, if there's already a small group, understanding if you are the insiders, that not everyone knows what you know and what you're working on, and being able to set a fresh table for new people to engage and not feel intimidated coming into a room of experts and feeling like they don't have anything to contribute.
Yeah, those are great points. I agree. there's a little, I think there's a little bit of a distinction between what the two of you are saying, not like opposed to each other, but if there were on a spectrum, I think my comments would tend more towards what Devin was saying, which is that I feel like at least, and that probably is specific to like my role and the like innate sort of power or authority that I have because I work for the local government. But yeah, I think in our partnership, people are looking to the county, or the county does have, or people in my role do have some new ideas, new perspectives, something fresh to offer. And especially if you're coming from out of town, as I am, that, kind of can help take longstanding ideas that people are enthusiastic about that may have stalled in a new direction, or just kind of give it a little like beginner's luck to it to get it going. And so I think, totally agree with what you're saying, Emily. And I also, again, coming in my role, also I was not from Mariposa, and definitely like entered into, is basically being the new kid in school, whatever, not from around here kind of thing. And there's a lot that you have to, be conscious of, and in terms of your interpersonal relationships and just body language and stuff like that. But also I think the idea that, you may have something to offer that is, even if you're from the area where you're advocating or representing, but moved back recently or reading different books or whatever it is, you may be able to loosen something that has been stuck for a while with a fresh perspective and a new energy. So I would add that.
Yeah, no, that's great. And that actually, Mikey, that leads well to the next question as well, which is sometimes that fresh perspective can really help, start a project that maybe others who would be helpful in that partnership may be more reluctant to engage in. So if one partner sees more value and has to coach others along for the ride, that can be a bit of a challenge. So could you tell us a little bit about the process the county took to engage Yosemite on your regional housing and mobility project?
Sure. The project's called the Integrated Mobility and Housing Strategy. It's a planning project recently adopted by our county board of supervisors 2 weeks ago. Recently. And the premise is that, like many, I'm sure probably like all of your communities, we have a dearth of housing available at all price points and for all sort of family situations. So we need every type of housing. We need rentals. We need ownership, different ownership models. We need places for young people. We need places for families. We need places for people to age in place. We need it all. And so, and including, we need workforce housing for all of our employers, for all levels of professional, all career levels. So the premise of this project was to sort of take a nibble at that by working explicitly to develop, to identify opportunities for new workforce housing that could help. I should back up and say that's true for the entire county, for all county residents and all county employers, including Yosemite National Park. And so the park is at a real disadvantage when it comes to being able to hire new staff or retain existing staff because they're not able to provide adequate housing for their employees. So I think at the time it was mostly anecdotal, but now there's like really hard evidence that people are turning down jobs in what many say is the most beautiful place in the entire world because they're not able to find a place to live that makes sense for their job. So the premise of this project was that the park needs housing, and the park needs housing, and in one way separately the county needs housing. But from another perspective, the park is a county employer, and people that need housing for the park are county residents. So there's one way of thinking it that we're sort of working towards the same objective, but the other way of thinking that is that it's not like we're two entities working towards one objective. It's that everybody who lives in the county needs housing, and that includes the park. So it's a little kind of a nuanced understanding of it. But anyway, the idea is that the park we can work with the park to identify opportunities, new development opportunities the county can support that address workforce housing needs in general throughout our county, especially for the park. And it's not just Yosemite, it's its concessioner. It's the post office has employees for the park. There's a post office in Yosemite. There's a conservancy. There's a whole range of different interests that are associated with the park that don't have housing close to it. So that's the basic backbone of this project, but with the added wrinkle that since there's nowhere in the park to develop new housing, the best opportunities are located sort of a distance away. And so planning for housing to support park employees, be they Park Service or otherwise, also needs to occur in conjunction with planning for transportation or really just general mobility solutions that help sort of shrink the distance between where people could be living and where they could be working. So where they could be living in the Gateway, where they could be working in the park. It's kind of it in a nutshell, but there are lots of other kind of interesting components to it, I think. But from a partnership perspective, I think what was kind of cool and interesting about it is that the county essentially is initiated this project to support housing development for our partner, which is the park. So the park has other things going on. They also are related to our housing shortfall, severely understaffed and lack the capacity in many ways to advance this sort of new housing pursuit. And ironically, maybe the local government is more nimble in this instance and able to kind of be a little bit more creative and innovative about finding ways to address this issue. And so we approached the park. This was our idea, and sort of brought park leadership on board. It was very easy. It's an easy sell. There was not a lot of conflict or hand holding. It was really just like, we have an idea, we'll take it on. Do you want to help? Please help, and please be a sort of a stakeholder and a participant. We'll rely on you for things like data and certainly buy-in, and we want to have your help in getting access to your employees so that we can ask them what they think and conduct this rigorous stakeholder engagement process with park employees. But really the bulk of the technical work was done by the county and our consultant. We hired a consultant with a grant from the state to do this. And the park was really just the essential stakeholder for this project. But the framework, the premise, and the sort of driving work was done by county staff, our consultant, and supported by perspectives from county residents, many of them not actually working for the park. That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah. And the housing and mobility strategy is pretty interesting. Jordan did share a link in the chat for anyone who wants to go check it out, because it was recently adopted. And so bringing the park along and showing them that it was in their best interest to engage with Mariposa worked out really well. It seems like, I guess this one, Mikey, your partnership has a little bit more of a closed loop around it, but Devin, you're obviously engaged in a longer term. TRPA has been going for decades now at this point. And so what are some ways you can set up partners and stakeholders to stay accountable and engaged in the process and make sure everyone keeps rowing in the same direction, especially when things can be so large at times?
Partnerships are just constantly hard work. I think that's the biggest takeaway, is you can't just set up a partnership and expect it to run off and go do its thing and live around forever. It really does take that constant engagement, partnership building, relationship building to keep the partner going in the same direction, understanding the ebbs and flows of elected official cycles, people coming and going from agencies, new problems coming up like COVID-19 pandemic. That's something that maybe some people predicted, but no one really would have expected the impacts that came out of that. So as you evolve and move through those challenges, I think in terms of accountability and keeping people going, our environmental improvement program, that partnership at the top has an executive steering committee, and that is representatives of local, state, federal level. And it's the actual executives of agencies like the Forest Service, like the Tahoe Conservancy. So you have the top boss setting the rules and setting those expectations. So when we have our smaller working groups, a working group for forest health, a working group for aquatic invasive species, a working group for transportation, those folks know that this partnership has buy-in from the top of their organizations, so they know that it's being taken seriously. And those groups are on the hook for doing annual reporting and coming back to the executives on a regular basis to report on their progress. So you have that top-down buy-in that helps the bottom-up support and really enable the staff people to work towards these and be accountable. But really, at the end of the day, it is about building partnerships and showing success. You know, you can only have people meet in a room and spin their wheels for so long before people give up. So being able to identify quick wins, early wins when you're first starting out the partnership can keep people energized and tackling some of the more gnarly solutions that take years to figure out.
Awesome. Yeah. And I guess, Emily, not to like put you on the spot, but as somebody who's also as part on one of those longer term ongoing processes, what's one way that the ZRC has found to kind of keep everyone going in the same direction?
I think relationships are so key here, and being able to form those over a long period of time. And I know it was mentioned early, but just an acceptance that collaboration takes a long time, inevitably. And just because it takes a long time doesn't mean there's anything inherently wrong with it. And I also would, shy away from reading too much into, for example, when folks, can't be at every single meeting, or when it feels like occasionally folks pull away. Hanlon's razor says, don't attribute to malice what can most adequately be, ascribed to stupidity. But I think when it comes to collaboration, it's don't attribute to malice what can most adequately describe by just lack of capacity. So just recognizing a lot of the time people have other things going on, and that our job in trying to encourage collaboration is just to meet people where they are as best we can and whenever we can. So I think that's a big part of the ZRC's success as well, is certainly people being committed to those relationships, even when there are ebbs and flows, and just recognizing that the process is worthwhile so long as you stick to it. Yeah.
On that capacity piece, that's so true. And I think as the convener of the partnership, or whoever that partnership coordinator is, like understanding that, and don't just have a meeting to meet because you can say we met, like really having a clear purpose and goal of your meeting and really clear outcomes and action items following up from that. I think the facilitation and follow up from a meeting can really help people be clear on their expectations and get them to do what you need, and not just leave kind of an open-ended question where they don't really know what they're supposed to do and move on to the next emergency.
Yeah, the dreaded meeting just to meet, for sure. That's great, guys. And I think that speaks really well to, the limited capacity people have. But it also speaks to the different scales that everyone is working at, between the federal agencies and the local municipalities. And, Mikey, I think the Yosemite partnership's really interesting, because what would you say to a community that feels like they're kind of the small kid on the playground, like you mentioned earlier, and that they don't have much of a say over the decisions made around them, especially in communities where they do have like a lot of federal land, or they have some different pressures coming down from the state ordinances or legal things happening. What would you say to someone who feels like a community that feels like they don't have much power or say in a process?
Yeah, I mean, you do. Believe in yourself and you can be anything. But also, like, you do, totally do, because you're like speaking and from my perspective, there's so many ways, like both like formal and informal, that you have like significant say. One thing I would just, in our situation, the way that I wouldn't, again, I'm not just saying this, it's not like we see ourselves as like a check on federal authority or something, or like we're like a we're just another, we all have interests, and the park's not like acting against our interests. They're just they've got objectives that are occasionally different than ours, and so do we, that are occasionally different from theirs. So I don't think that we are like trying to, counteract like federal overreach or anything like that. They're just, situations where what the park wants to do or what the park has to do don't align with what we see our best interests as. So in that case, we do organize I guess I don't, because I'm not really supposed to do this, but citizens, empower themselves or empower their local representatives, in our case, our board of supervisors, to speak for or advocate for them when, in the sort of formal ways. But I think the more interesting kind of perspective is that like the people who work for your federal, the people that manage if it's federal, state, or whatever, they also probably like live in your community or like have some relationship to your community. They're not just like, over there in some other place it has a imaginary boundary around it that makes it different than you, the imaginary jurisdictional boundary around it. Like they're real people. Their kids probably go to the same schools as your kids or whatever. You probably shop at the same grocery store. We have one grocery store in Mariposa County. So like it's just, I think this kind of very much touches on what Emily was just talking about relationships. And it's like and the power of collaboration and partnership is like, you stop seeing each other as, the other agency or the other whatever. It's like, they're just people who they make up this organization that you are collaborating with or hopefully not working against. And so are you. You're just a person, and you're I don't know. I think so you have power in that regard, because the person that you're, and I think that's really cool about the sort of the gnarly places or whatever, is that many, if not all of the communities that you represent are probably quite rural, like Mariposa or the Zion, Greater Zion, and some of the other communities in the TRPA jurisdiction. And so uniquely, it gives you that sort of intimacy and closeness with your neighbors, and uniquely gives you that ability to participate in local and regional initiatives, because there's not that many other people to do it. So like everybody wears a million hats and everybody serves on multiple boards, or, that's probably why they can't come to all of the meetings, because it's not that they don't have a lot of capacity, it's that they have so much capacity that's spread out to so many other things, because in small places, there's not enough people to do it. So I think, anyway, so generally speaking, I think that's kind of the philosophy or like the mindset that we take into our relation, at least that I take into our relationships with our federal partners. And yeah, understand that there's like the company line, there's what they're saying in DC or Sacramento or wherever, Montpelier, I guess, like the location might be. But then there's like the on the ground perspective of the actual person, the river ranger who works for BLM and is like the guy for BLM in your community or wherever it might be. And now those aren't always the same thing. And so you can and as a person in a small place, you have the ability to see both things and to access it from that ground level. So I think that's been our approach so far. And yeah, so far so good.
Yeah, I think
so Ruth, go for it.
I was just going to say, I think a big key to what Mikey said about the community and getting the community involved. I think it's also important for the community to have a unified vision, no matter how big or small you are. If you're going to your federal partners and your community and they're getting dozens of letters asking for dozens of different things on a certain topic, like a trails project or a transportation project, that's going to send mixed signals about what the community wants. But if the community can come together with a unified voice and say, this is what we want, and it's a very succinct, unified message, it's much easier for the federal government to say, okay, that's what they want, we can work towards that, versus them getting 20 different ideas and saying, well, we pick one of these and it's going to make everyone else upset about that we didn't pick their idea. And that kind of dilutes your voice in those situations.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a great added thought to that. And I do think the human element of it, like you were saying, Mikey, like human to human relationships can be really powerful. And operating at that community voice scale as well, like you mentioned, Devin. Those are two different ways to approach these relationships. And I think it's sometimes more simple when there's like a cut and dry, problem to be dealt with, whether it's like a road project or a trail. But sometimes when the situation calls for ongoing collaboration, it can be hard to keep those lines of communications going, especially, you've mentioned the pandemic, Devin. Obviously, that's a great catalyst. Crisis is a great way to get people together. But what about ways to keep communities and regions and those lines of communication going when maybe there's not an immediate crisis happening, or there isn't like a thing everyone's working toward? How do you keep those relationships alive, even if they're not meeting all the time? And I guess that's a great question for you to start out with, Emily, and Mikey and Devin, if you have any thoughts, definitely hop in.
Definitely. Well, in the vein of redefining, I think one of the challenges is that there's historically a very concrete way that we look at problem or issue or project. And I think one of the valuable things that we can redefine is that sometimes a process can be a project, sometimes a process can be a goal. So making collaboration the goal, and whatever happens out of it, I think can really help. But that requires a lot of work. And in that also a lot of relationships. I think that's how you kind of build that, because it takes a lot of trust to say, we're going to meet, even though we don't have a concrete goal in mind for this meeting, or even if there's not, money attached to a project that is motivating us to meet. I have trust in the people around me, in the partners that I work with, that I have benefited from collaboration enough to know that it's worthwhile to just keep on this path. And we've had countless examples of that in the ZRC. We're currently working on building a corridor trail, a multi-use trail connecting the gateway communities of Laverkin all the way to the south entrance of Zion National Park. And we have, through the ZRC, an excellent relationship with our local Utah Department of Transportation representative. And funding for active transportation came through at the state level. Because that person attends our meetings, because we have personal connections with that individual, they were able to tell us about that funding, sign us up for it automatically. And we have now $12 million from the state going directly towards that trail through certainly a simpler process than a lot of these other trails have to go through. And that again is just due to maintaining that level of collaboration, maintaining those relationships, and recognizing that even if you don't see the end goal, you just have to trust sometimes that that something will happen and something will come out of it. And I can speak for the ZRC too and say that when you have those relationships as well, those meetings are fun, they're enjoyable. I was back in Utah in the beginning of February, and certainly conflicts come up, but if you can depersonalize those conflicts and really appreciate the people around you on a relationship level, you should be having a good time. It's nice to be able to get together and talk in that way.
Awesome. That's the making it a positive experience, I think, is a great thing to take out of that as well. Like, these don't just have to be like head to the grindstone, just get it done. But these can be positive, like, relationships that we build with each other. Devin, I'd actually love to hop over to you. I know that the Tahoe region has been creating a destination stewardship framework to help guide development in the region. And that's a different process than TRPA goes under. Can you tell us a little bit about how that process is different from the ongoing TRPA partnership?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like most of our gateway communities, especially in the West in the last several years, sustainable recreation, destination stewardship has really become the hot buzzword and the thing that everyone is working on. Obviously, that's really why this whole Gnarly initiative exists, is to tackle this big problem, and Tahoe's no different in needing to tackle it. We've been working on the environment through the Environmental Improvement Program for over 20 years. But one of those things that really did come out of the pandemic was we got the cracks in our recreation and stewardship system really started to show with those pressures we were seeing from the COVID-19 pandemic. So our partners mobilized and were able to meet and really address those in the short term. But through that, emergency response of making sure trash cans were being cleaned out, and the parking lot that was now closed because there's a forest closure and everyone's just walking out in the woods on the other side of the highway, and you need to send rangers out there. Through all of that, we learned a lot. And for the last year, we've been working on a broader destination stewardship plan to really create a more sustainable recreation and tourism system for the Tahoe Basin that still allows people to enjoy the lake, allows residents to enjoy the lake, protects their quality of life, and supports our local businesses. But what we discovered early on in this process was our existing structure and our existing partnership didn't perfectly align with what we were trying to do. Obviously, there was a lot of overlap, but there was new stakeholders and new partners that needed to be involved that weren't currently at the table, including some of the local businesses, rec providers, the destination management organizations. So instead of just trying to jam a whole bunch of people into an existing partnership and hope for the best, we really took a step back, engaged with the business community, with our destination management organizations, and said, okay, we need to create a new table. We need to create a new partnership that can really tackle this problem head on. So it's been a newer adventure for our agency, being involved in that again as one of those backbone organizations to bring the partnership together, but really broaden who we're engaging with, bringing in new ideas, new topics. And I think the action plan for that will be coming out in the next couple of months. But I think the greatest benefit of that process so far has just, we've gotten people in a room together to talk about issues that typically haven't been in a room together to talk about those issues. And just getting that far, it may not sound like a lot, but when you're talking about the scale of what you're dealing with, like that is a major accomplishment in and of itself. And I think to Emily's comment on the last question, if your group's only meeting to deal with crises, they're not going to be fun. Like, you also need to make sure you're taking those times to celebrate successes and pat yourselves on the back every once in a while. So I can drop a link in the chat with some more information on that project if people want to learn more.
Yeah, that would be great. And I think that's a great way to wrap it up, like that this is an ongoing thing, and that to celebrate those wins, because they do count so much. We are about 3 minutes from 3 here, and so I would love to ask our panelists all one final question, and then I have a couple wrap-up slides. In like 1 minute or less, what would be your one key nugget of wisdom, or one thing our audience members could go out and do tomorrow that could help them build or strengthen a partnership? Emily, would you like to go first? Oh,
yeah.
or Devin? Oh, nope, Emily, go.
Okay. Yeah, I can go first. And that's, I think when we think about collaboration, a lot of the time it's external. It's, who can I partner with? What are the projects? But I have found so much value in kind of reflecting internally on what I'm bringing to collaboration. So whether that's how I feel about conflict and how I deal with conflict, whether that's how I communicate, whether that's how I manage a meeting, any of those things, I think it's really worthwhile to just, sit down for a couple of minutes with yourself and think about kind of the energy, the skills, the perspective that you're bringing into a collaborative effort, because, I can speak from my experience that it has counted for a lot to be able to do that. And I think it contributes hugely to the efficacy of any collaborative effort.
Awesome. Devin, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I was going to say, get to know the people you're partnering with and other stakeholders on a more personal level. You really can't build those relationships and those partnerships if you only stick to the topic at hand. And given the season that we're in, like, go skiing with someone.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Mikey?
similarly, I mean, I don't know. I think this feels similar to me. But this is my turn to mention fun. I think persist like it's fun. And be grateful for the opportunity. I would say to be of service to your community and your region, and and you'll be more effective at doing that with other people. Or other agencies or organizations, and you'll be more effective at it if you're enjoying it and feeling motivated and inspired by the work. And if you don't already, please try to find like the meaning and the joy in it, because otherwise it's just depressing and hard. But it doesn't have to be. It can be fulfilling and fun.
That's awesome. I love that. I love ending the session on such a positive note with you all, and like, yeah, that it's worthwhile. And then it's awesome that we have the opportunity to work together on these things. I would love to thank our panelists for joining us today. It was great to chat with you all. You can, and actually Devin's going to join us for our peer-to-peer session afterward. Unfortunately, Emily and Mike may have to run. And with that said, we are at 3 o'clock. So if anybody has to hop off, we understand. We would love if you could join us for our peer-to-peer networking right after this. Jordan dropped the registration link in the chat already. When you close your webinar, you will get a survey. Please take our survey. We would love to hear from you how these are landing, what you'd like to see more of, and who we're reaching. We want to make sure we're reaching as broad of an audience as possible. And then finally, anyone who's left, as people trickle away, if you want to drop one insight, observation, or takeaway you have from this session into the chat, or any other successful regional collaboratives you have, please pop them over into the chat or shoot me an email. My email is liz.soja@usu.edu. And we are so grateful for you all. We hope you join us for our final session on March 30th. And with that, we will see those of you who can join us over on the peer-to-peer. So one last time, thank you so much, our panelists, for your experience and your wisdom. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Take care.